Hello and welcome to the first of a series of town hall meetings, Ask Me Anything sessions. I'm Ed Bassett, CISO from Neosystems, and my special guest today is Chris Golden, member of the board of directors of the CMMC accreditation body. We're recording these sessions as part of our community outreach to the defense industrial base around the CMMC initiative. Our focus as a service provider is primarily on organizations that are seeking certification, although much of the material may be interested to people who are involved in CMMC as assessors or in other capacities as well. I want to encourage the audience members today, please send any questions you have during the session in. We will take as many audience questions as time allows, so just use the Q&A feature here in the Zoom webinar to get your questions in front of Chris and myself. I'll start with a quick introduction of Chris. So Chris Golden had a distinguished career as an Air Force officer. He's been involved in cybersecurity for the government, also the finance sector and healthcare sectors, and is now on the CMMC accreditation body on the board of directors and is co-chairing two committees there, the infrastructure committee and the finance committee. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you. Maybe just give us a little bit of overview of the work that you're doing today with the CMMC accreditation body.
Sure. Again, thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, we on the accreditation body formed back in sort of late last year at behest of the Department of Defense to try to figure out how to run the program, right? They knew that they had the CMMC methodology they were going to roll out. They wanted the members of the DIB to participate in it, but they didn't know sort of what to do from there. So a bunch of us got together and started brainstorming, eventually incorporated as a nonprofit in the state of Maryland and formed a board. As you said, I'm on the board. There's 15 of us now on the board total. And we're going through all the various steps to bring this thing to life. We're writing the standard that we'll use to be for my assessors to actually figure out what a pass and a fail looks like. We're creating the training for the assessors, et cetera, et cetera. We're getting ready to register C3PAOs and assessors here probably in the next 10 days or so. So we're doing a lot of work trying to get all these things up and running, and you'll hear more. If you haven't been to our website, please go there. It's www.cmmcab.org. As a nonprofit, sort of, we get the org address, and it'll hopefully answer your questions. If not, to reach out to one of us on the board, and we'll be happy to answer. Thanks.
Cool, thanks, Chris. Just to kind of tie this back to you personally and why you're contributing to the CMMC at this time. What is it about this initiative that drew you to volunteer to be a member of the board of directors and to do all this work that you're talking about with the CMMC AB?
Yeah, sure. Like you mentioned, I'm a retired Air Force colonel, so I've sort of wanted to serve the country since I was very, very young, and I did so for a couple of decades plus. When I retired and sort of moved on to the civilian sector, I did cybersecurity and third-party risk management for large organizations, banks, healthcare firms, insurers, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I saw the RFI released back in October, I think, but don't quote me on that, from the DoD saying, hey, we want to do this, but we're not sure how, I was one of the 41 people and or companies that replied to that RFI saying, well, here's how I do it. Since this is sort of in my wheelhouse of doing third-party risk management, my patriotism probably is what led me to put in all this effort. I think it's important for the country. I think it's important for the Department of Defense. And so as a red-blooded American citizen, I jumped in with both feet.
Very good, very good. Well, first of all, thanks for your service. Thanks for volunteering. I mean, this is an important initiative, and it's not getting off the ground. You mentioned there's a lot of complexity, a lot of mechanics, and I think there's been quite a bit of focus on the mechanics, right? When are we going to know the details, and how is it going to work? And people really wanting to dive deep at a very early stage. But let me fly up a little bit and ask, what do you see as the kind of the key benefits of CMMC? How does it improve our security posture, right? Why does it make that patriotic blood move quicker? What are we expecting to get out of this once we've got it up and running and things are going along?
I think there's two sides to that coin. So one is the national security side, right? So we think, and a lot of others agree with us, that there's about a $600 billion with a B dollar flow of intellectual property around the planet each year, going from relatively good guys to relatively bad guys. And we'd like to stop that, right? We'd like to turn that spigot off so that the competition on the international front, especially in the national security realm, is a little more sided to us. We want to win that, obviously. So I think raising everybody's game on the cyber side in the Department of Defense supply chain is very important to doing that. So just taking companies that may have not thought about cybersecurity, bringing them up to a level 1 in the CMMC vernacular, having 17 controls and doing what we call basic cyber hygiene. You know, are you monitoring who's on your network? Do you change passwords when people leave, et cetera, et cetera? Not very expensive, not very time consuming, but some things that are just sort of get left behind. So that's the number 1 reason. Number 2, DoD will tell you that if you're a defense contractor and you're spending a lot of money to maybe be not CMMC, but NIST 171 compliant, you know, and the person next to you is not doing that, but they're self-attesting that they are, you're at a competitive disadvantage, right? You're spending money that you may not be able to recoup. Their ability to underbid you may be there. So by having this third party come in and assess you means everybody's on the same playing field and sort of making the same investment. So I think those are the 2 things that I would think out of why this is important.
So raise the bar and maybe level the bar, right?
Yes, absolutely.
What about, you mentioned level 1 and so the tiering effect, that's something we've not seen before, right? So in the previous standard, you're either committed to 800, 171, all 110 items, or it's not in your contract and you're back to the FAR. So there hasn't been this sort of tiering that we're seeing in CMMC. Does that make it easier for companies to start doing business with the DoD? Is that the intent? Obviously, at the high end, the intent is to take those that are doing the most sensitive work and really raise the bar, right? Take it to a higher level than it's been in the past. But having that tiered system, is that intended to make the barriers to entry a little lower while still raising the bar? I mean, is that the game here?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's trying to lower the barriers to entry. It's trying to protect the right information with the right controls, right? So you mentioned the DFARS. So, you know, the DFARS are basically level 1 is what they are. So if you are DFARS compliant now, you should be very, very close to a CMMC level 1 assessment level. And then as you move up the chain of the sensitivity of the information, you become level 3, which is where the sort of the CUI is introduced. And it's basically NIST 171, but with addition of 20 controls that we thought were important. So that becomes CMMC level 3. So you should be pretty close if you're NIST 171 right now being CMMC level 3. But again, as the data gets a little bit more sensitive, then we go up to 4, and then eventually we go to 5. So it's really about identifying the sensitivity of the data and then protecting it correctly more than anything else.
So spend the money on the things that matter, spend less where it's not as critical, right?
Absolutely.
So makes sense. The audience here, as I mentioned, primarily organizations that are seeking certification, right? So we're all watching CMMC very closely. We want to prepare well. We want to be ready for it. What's your kind of top advice, especially the early adopters, right? Everybody's chomping at the bit to get certified. Especially if they think they've got their cybersecurity act together already, then they want to get that certification quicker because it's a potential competitive advantage. What are those things that we can be doing today while CMMC is still being fleshed out? We can't go get a certification tomorrow, not
Right.
possible. So what would you suggest for the preparatory steps to take right now for members of the DIB?
Yeah, I think if you are not handling CUI, then you're following the DFARS. Continue to follow the DFARS. That's your requirement now in your contract. Don't run away from that just because you think CMMC is coming around the corner, even though it is. But those DFAR requirements are going to lead you very nicely into level 1 certification. So I would say if you're doing that, continue to do that. Once you start handling CUI, follow NIST 171. So it's self-attestation. You're allowed to have POAMs. We want a security plan, et cetera, et cetera. Many of those things do not happen in CMMC. But you're going to be very close to CMMC level 3 if you are following NIST 171 guidance. So I would say keep doing what you're doing. Evaluate whether you want or need to have CUI on your systems. If you don't, get rid of it, right? So by the time we roll around, you don't need a level 3, you only need a level 1. So know what's on your network. If you think it's competitive for you and your business to be handling CUI and be level 3, by all means, we'll help you get there. But if it's not, then go ahead and take a step back and maybe think about removing some of that CUI from your system so you don't have to go through the time and expense of a level 3 assessment. You can get done with a level 1 assessment. So that would be my recommendation, is continue to follow what's in your contracts because those are going to get you close. It's not going to get you all the way there, but it's going to get you close.
Yeah, correct. Stop me if this is a premature question, but I heard you mention POAMs and the fact that that's really not going to be a factor within CMMC. I've heard this from various sources. I've been doing cybersecurity probably around as long as you have, my whole career. I've never worked on a system that had every single control met 100% of the time, right? Just doesn't happen. There's always things that need attention, need work. So no system has perfect compliance, and certainly no system has perfect security. How does CMMC intend to handle that, if not through a POAM process? The fact
Yeah.
that when an assessor goes in, if they find one small thing out of place, that can't be a fail, or the system's not going to pass anybody, right? What's the intention there?
So that is the intention. The intention is the standard, and you either meet or you do not meet the standard. Will it be one little thing that fails you? No, I don't think so. And we're still working on the standard that will help assessors in that determination. But if let's say, access control is one of the first domains, right? Know who's on your network. If you cannot prove to the assessor that you know who's on your network in a consistent and reliable fashion, you will fail that control and you will not get whatever level that you're shooting for that the price. Since that's a level 1, you probably won't get any level if you cannot do that. If you have a POAM that says, hey, here's our plan to become compliant with this, that's great. You'll have to pay for and get another assessment. The POAMs are not something we're going to really take into consideration on the CMM side. You either meet the standard or you do not meet the standard.
Makes sense. So, there's always, in most security frameworks, there's a notion of what I kind of refer to colloquially as the policy for not meeting the policy, right? An ability for those in their risk acceptance decision-making capacity to decide that something is okay in that particular case, right? That we need an exception to a standard because things are a little different in terms of how we're operating. In the CMMC world, how does that get determined? Is that up to the assessor? Is that up to the accreditation body? Is that something that a government contractor could make a decision and show that to the assessor and say, hey, I've decided that this control should be interpreted this way for my particular systems? Who's the decision-making, the risk acceptance authority in this framework?
Yeah, so it'll be DoD. They'll do the risk acceptance. As of right now, there will be no exceptions granted. Again, you either meet the standard or you do not meet the standard. However, as we go through DFAR's rulemaking, that may change. I don't know what the outcome of that will be, but we're going to have to sort of wait and see how the rulemaking changes, where they may or may not provide that. But that's sort of at the DoD and the political level. But as of right now, today, we will not be granting any exceptions.
Very good. Let me ask a little bit about the committees that you're working with, that you're co-chairing. So first, the Finance Committee. What is the Finance Committee doing that we should know about, that should be of interest to us? What can we expect to see coming out of that work?
Not a whole lot, unless you can't get to sleep at night. Yeah, we're looking at, how we're going to hire people, what their salaries are going to be, what kind of skill sets we need. As we look at, the money coming in, how are we, best allocating that to, meet our needs? What's the first thing we have to buy? What's the second thing we need to buy? Et cetera, et cetera. So that's the committee. We meet once a week, and we just talk about those kind of things. How do we sort of, make this on the financial side? At some point, we'll hire something like a CFO, and most of those responsibilities will translate to that person, and they'll just sort of run the finance there. And then the Finance Committee will switch to sort of a real board of directors kind of oversight, strategic guidance kind of function. They won't do the day-to-day stuff, but right now, until we hire somebody like that, it's the day-to-day nitnoid, accounting stuff.
Got it. So some of the committees are doing things that are a lot more kind of consumer facing.
Absolutely.
Finance Committee sounds a little bit more internal.
Yes.
What about the Infrastructure Committee? Is that also kind of internal, or things that are going to affect how we receive these assessments?
Yeah, it is. So what kind of laptops should we buy for the business? What security should be on those laptops? Are we going to spin up a cloud instance to help us? Are we going to, what kind of SIEM platform are we going to buy? It's the kind of stuff that, again, it's sort of internal facing. But as we build the business, and there's a requirement in our MOU with DoD that we be CMMC level 3 certified as the AB. So how do we build that sort of from the ground up, rather than going out and buying a whole bunch of hardware and software and then saying, golly gee, it looks like we need to change a lot of this stuff to meet the requirements. Let's just know what the requirements are and build it from the very beginning. So that's primarily what we're doing on the Infrastructure Committee.
Got it. For some of the other committees that are out there, what are some things that we should be anticipating coming out? We've heard that the DFAR, potentially new DFARS clause is coming out. I know that's not an accreditation body action per se, but we have heard that that's likely to be out. Basically, CMMC language, draft rulemaking that's going to make CMMC the law of the land for DoD acquisitions. What other things are kind of happening in the near term that the AB is involved with?
Yeah, so I think within the next 10 days, 2 weeks or so, we're going to open up registration for C3 PAOs and assessors. So you can, if that's sort of something you're interested in being, you can come to the website and you can register. We finally have got some credentialing processes in place on what we want to see in those kind of companies and those individuals. So we'll be able to sort of, look at your, let's say, resume or your company's profile and knock it against our list of things that we want to see and determine whether you'd be a good fit for the program or not. So that's probably the big thing in the near term. We'll start rolling out training here to a very select few, probably only about 60 individuals at first, just to sort of see how we do, because obviously we'll make mistakes. We want to learn from those. So we don't want to train everybody on the wrong thing. We'll train 20 people and then we'll learn some lessons, and we'll train another 20 and we'll learn some more lessons. And hopefully by the third cohort, we've sort of figured out what we're doing and we can now roll out larger training. But we'll roll out that training here in the next 30 to 45 days or so. So if anybody's interested in training, that kind of stuff will be happening. So those are sort of the big rocks we're moving here on the board right now, trying to get things going. We don't think any assessments will start until after rulemaking, so October-ish is the best guess. So, once we get through rulemaking and the DoD actually decides exactly what they want, then we'll be able to go forth and start assessing. There will only be a very limited number of contracts that will require CMMC assessments in the beginning, maybe 10 this year, this fiscal year, if any. And so we'll, when you look at everybody that wants to raise their hand for those particular contracts, plus their subs, if any, we're looking to only do about 1,000 initial assessments. We're not going to do the whole 100,000 a year kind of thing that we're going to gear towards in the out years. But we'll do those 1,000s. Again, we'll probably make mistakes. We'll learn from it, all that kind of stuff, get better as we go on. But those are probably the big rocks we're moving right now.
So you mentioned maybe 1,000 the first year. A lot of the folks that we're talking with right now are the early adopters, right? They sort of self-select. They're the ones that are coming to our community outreach events and asking the most questions. Others may be sitting back in the wings, kind of waiting for others to plow the ground. But for those early adopters, they really would like to do this as soon as possible. If someone wants to be in that first 1,000, if they're eager to do it, they think they've got their act together, is there a way to join that party? If you're in one of the Pathfinder contracts, obviously, then you're going to be selected in. Are there other ways to kind of put your name in the ring and say, hey, I'm ready. I'd like to be assessed?
Yeah, it really depends, frankly, on our bandwidth. As we start producing assessors, that's sort of the key thing. When we have only, let's say, our first 3 cohorts, our first 60 assessors, they can only do so much. And so we want to focus them on the Pathfinder contracts, all the people that are interested in that, all the subs potentially to any primes, et cetera, et cetera. If there's extra bandwidth, I think we have no problem with going out to sort of who else wants to raise their hand and be an early adopter, but we don't know that yet. And we're not going to know that here for another couple months in terms of how many contracts we actually have to do, how many assessors we actually have trained and certified, and then we can start doing some math and trying to figure out whether we've got the bandwidth to include others. If not, if you're not in that cohort, or let's say we can't do that, then use the time available until next year when we start doing some more, and the aperture will get a little bit bigger. It'll be a few more contracts. It'll probably be up in the 5,000 or 7,000 assessments for that second wave. Use that time to either get DFARS compliant or NIST 171 compliant, and you've taken a huge step to where you need to be.
Very good. The standards committee, so you mentioned sort of meeting the standard, not meeting the standard. So we've all seen the official CMMC publication that's come out. The standards committee, are they working on something that's going to augment that, an assessment guide or other kind of things? Do you know specifically what product we can expect from them that might give a little more idea as far as what's good enough, what's not good enough, what's going to be acceptable, not acceptable?
Yeah, that's the whole thing the standards committee is working on, and they've got about 50 or 60 people outside the board that have raised their hand to volunteer on the working groups to help create that. Basically, if you looked at NIST 171 right now today, and then NIST 171 Alpha, which is the assessment guide to 171, it's going to be very, very similar to 171 Alpha, right? It's going to be an assessment guide that says, okay, here's the control, here's what's considered passing and failing, here are some things you may want to look at. Do you want to examine this? Do you want to test this? Do you want to interview for this, et cetera, et cetera? It'll have all that guidance for an assessor to look at, and obviously we'll make that public probably, so companies can start looking at that and doing their own self-assessments as they prepare for the formal assessment to come in. But yeah, that is exactly what the standards committee is working on.
But definitely looking at that 171 Alpha flavor, as far as if you're looking at that today, that's probably going to be the same level of detail that they're looking at.
Yeah, I believe so.
Very good. Couple of again, maybe technical implementation questions, so maybe premature. We'll see. Around 2 things. One is segmentation. One is inheritance. So let me tee these up. There's a comment in the CMMC standard that contractors will be able to make their own decisions about the scope of their CMMC certification. A lot of questions are floating around companies that maybe have multiple areas of business, right? So the difference with CMMC versus previous is previous we're focused on systems. So you had a system security plan and you did it on a per system basis. CMMC is on a per organization basis. Companies that may have different parts of their business operating at different CMMC levels, can they get multiple? Can they split things up? What's the notion there as far as how that's going to apply, where it's not a monolithic one company, kind of picture?
Yeah, so we'll have a number of different types of scoping. One obviously will be the enterprise, right? For many small businesses, that'll be all they have. There will be various enclave ones and various subnet ones that the companies can work with. When the company is determining their scope, they're going to have to work with their assessor and their C3PO to sort of come to that agreement. I don't think it's going to be 100% of the company's decision, nor do I think it's going to be 100% the C3PO's and the assessor's decision, but there should be some kind of agreement as to what the scope is before the assessment begins. That's just sort of basic, auditing 101. In terms of what it's going to look like, we're going to follow the data. So if you are a company and you want to be level 3 because you have CUI, whatever system has CUI will have to be level 3 CMMC certified, right? So any system that is not logically and or physically separated from that system, so meaning the data can flow to that system, will also be in scope for the assessment. So if you have a small enclave, let's say, that's doing specific work for the government that needs to be at CMMC level 3 or any other level for that matter, and it is logically and physically separated from everything else you have, then you will only need that enclave to be assessed. If it is not logically and or physically separated from that network, then the rest of your network now becomes in scope for a level 3 assessment, because the CUI could flow through those openings to those other systems, and so they have to be protected as well. So again, I go back to an earlier comment saying, if you have CUI in your system and you don't want it, or you don't want it in specific places, take the time now to identify that and remove that so you can sort of limit your exposure. I don't know if anybody's familiar with PCI DSS, the payment card industry data security standard. That's the number one thing most banks, credit card companies, and processors will do, is try to limit the places that credit card data goes. So when they come get assessed for their PCI DSS assessment, it's only this set of computers or this set of laptops or servers or et cetera. So that's the way we think what's going to happen.
So that makes sense for CUI, where you've got systems that are processing CUI and store it needs to be level 3. If you have other systems then that don't process CUI, do they need to be level 1? Could they be anything? Do they have any standard applied to them, or are they out of scope entirely?
It depends. So, let's take a big business. I'll pick on Lockheed Martin here just because it came to mind, even though it's not, I'm not really picking on them. They may have a specific thing at Skunk Works that has to be level 5, and so that specific enclave will be level 5. It will be logically and or physically separated from all the rest of their network. So that's just the only thing they do. There's some other piece of work they're doing somewhere else, building the F-35 that's got CUI, so it's got to be level 3. It is logically and or separated from everything else. So that's the only thing it needs to be. Their enterprise system, what runs Lockheed Martin's personnel, payroll, HR, et cetera, maybe it's got FCI, federal contracting information, so that now needs to be level 1. So it depends on the data being flowed. If Lockheed Martin could prove to us that no, there is no FCI, CUI, or any other sensitive data on their corporate side, then there's no assessment needed. It's outside the scope. Got
it. Makes sense. What about sort of the other side, where people want to inherit CMMC status or inherit controls from service providers? In FedRAMP, we have this kind of assess once, use many concept, right? That once a control has been assessed and looked at, that can be reused by multiple agencies. Is that same kind of notion going to be in CMMC? In other words, if you're buying services from a service provider and that service provider has been CMMC certified, can the consumer of those services essentially inherit that? And how does that work if it's known today?
Yes, and that's the short answer. The long answer is we're working reciprocity with a whole bunch of different things. We don't think people should pay twice for the same controls, just like you mentioned. So we'll talk about FedRAMP here. So if you use FedRAMP, and obviously FedRAMP really sort of only applies to cloud service providers that are providing those kind of services to various companies. And let's say we go to domain 1 access control. There are 3 or 4 things that have to happen within access control. If your FedRAMP certified provider handles 2 of those, let's say, check, right? You're done. Now you just have to prove you're doing the 3rd. And since all cloud security relationships are a shared security model, there's always something for the cloud provider to do, and there's always something for the tenant to do. You may still have work to do, but if those controls for CMMC are met by the FedRAMP certified thing, then those controls will count.
Very good, very good. Chris, we have just a few minutes left. I think all the questions that I've seen, I've asked, either mine or ones that have come in. If anybody does have any questions out there, please feel free to send those in the next couple of minutes. Barring that, Chris, I'll give you a few minutes just to kind of give any concluding remarks, other things you want to share with our audience today.
Yeah, I think, we're looking at between 300 and 350,000 companies in the defense industrial base. We're planning on assessing them once per 3 years. So, you're not going to be on the hook for this every year. You can sort of do it once and then, take a breath for 3 years. You'll have to maintain your systems in accordance with what's been assessed, obviously, and sort of self-report any sort of major changes that have happened so we can determine whether a new assessment is needed. But you've got time. If you're not in the Pathfinder thing, you've definitely got probably at least a year to sort of start going in that direction. So again, I would recommend two things. Number one, do whatever's in your contract now. If your contract is you need to be DFARS compliant, be DFARS compliant. If you're NIST 171 compliant, be NIST 171 compliant. And two, figure out sort of what you want to be in the future. If you don't want to go through a CUI assessment for level 3, maybe start looking at your systems and get rid of that stuff. Or if you want to do it, but you want to limit it, then figure out how you're going to subnet your systems to make them logically and or physically separated so we can come in and do just that area for level 3 and then either no assessment for the rest of your network or a level 1, which is only 17 controls. Should be much easier, much more cost effective.
Excellent, Chris. Thanks for joining Neosystems and our audience today. As I say, we're all very, very interested, very supportive of CMMC. The audience that we're talking to is primarily the folks that are the most interested in making sure that the benefits you described really get achieved, right? That we get certification, that we take certification to our customers, the people who buy services from us. So I want to thank you for adding some clarity to what we can expect as we, we're all kind of going down the path together, and sometimes the questions and the answers don't line up in time. So, so I think you shed a lot of light on some things that have been out and about for quite a while now, and really clarified how that's going to work. So I really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm happy to come, and if you want me to come back and answer some more, happy to do that as well.
We'll take you up on that. Thanks very much.